Hi. So today I'm going to be playing Gotten by Slash featuring Adam Levine. I really love this song. It's nice and mellow. So I did a dry run through. It isn't too hard. It is only 6 chords. The interesting thing about this song is there are optional notes in it. So I'm interested to see how that turns out because I haven't played it with the music yet, but I did play it with the optional chords in my dry run throughs. But there is quite a bit of movement, so I think it'll be a good challenge for me. I like the song from Slash because it is a lot more mellow, and I think Adam Levine's voice is just absolutely perfect on this track. And I do really, really love to sing it. So we'll see how that goes too. But my voice isn't doing too great today, so I don't feel as confident in my singing as I do in actually being able to play the notes, because I won't say keyboard playing either because obviously I don't play like a real keyboardist. So yeah, we'll just see how it goes and come along for the ride. I've cried to the song a lot over the years. It's not really that sad, but the times in my life I've gravitated to it were more challenging. Often circling back at times I felt misunderstood or was going through a major life change and felt like I was struggling to find my footing. One of the interesting things about this song for me, though, is unlike many, in my case mostly sad ones, that I've turned to in my past, what or who I think of when I listen to the song has changed over the years, multiple times. It's remained relevant and for me reflective. There are definitely some themes it represents here within my own life, which is great. It makes it easier to keep listening to over time. Maybe not as much great about the themes that keep recurring in my life, and I still feel misunderstood no matter what I say. I listened to the song probably 20 times and wrote part of this episode before I even remembered who the song initially represented for me. My first optional chord. Oh, still too early. The misfit with the dark sense of humor. For better or worse, laid the groundwork for my perspective on relationships and my comfort in a perpetual state of unhealthy situationships. Oh my god, I was obsessed though. Like unhealthy obsessed, but it was also like peak OCD max symptom time of my life as well. Not an excuse, but definitely not something I was very good at managing at the time. At the time I met him, I hadn't met anyone else like him. He would just say whatever the fuck, and it didn't even matter if it was offensive. Humor was much more chill about this kind of stuff back then, so it was kind of relevant for the time. And it was hilarious. Like, if you weren't laughing at the joke, you'd be laughing at the audacity, but either way, everybody would be laughing. He also had, like, just a really strong presence, and a lot of people, even if they didn't like him, respected him. And I thought that that was just really cool. Time changes a lot, though. Now, I'll always say that I'm grateful for the experiences with everyone who's entered my life because they're all learning experiences. Even if the relationships themselves sour at some point, it's all about appreciate those times you spent with those people. And a lot of these people, like, I've had a lot of fun with them. Oh, I was way too early on that. And I feel like there's not enough notes for the solo that's in the headphones. And we've had a lot of shitty times too. And overall, my life wouldn't necessarily have been better had any of those relationships worked out. But I'm usually glad that I've met them. And sometimes, even if that's just, I'm glad for who I became after I healed from meeting them. Sometimes positivity is just a matter of reframing it like that. Now, when I go back to thinking about like him, that's the benchmark of my teenage years. it's hard not to reflect on how far I've come since then and how much I've grown away from who I was at that time, or any of the other versions with a rotating cast over the years in my life. Okay, after the first run through of that, that is really fun to play. It's a good interlude to pause and do air guitar though, so very excited about that. And I do have to say that I do think the optional notes are a great call. So I am going to choose to keep playing it with that. Uh, but yeah, that's just where we're at for now. So I'm just going to run it back. I guess I just never expected to shed so many versions of myself over the years. It took me a long time to get over him, and I stuck around for way longer than I should have, as has usually been my tendency to do, because up until then, I hadn't found anyone that I thought understood me as well. And it wasn't until I was much older that I realized that him knowing me as well as I thought he did really only applied to certain aspects of who I was at that time. And the longer we spent time around each other, the less that remained accurate. He just represented having more similar aspects to me in the beginning than anyone else that I had met previously. As I met more people and got more life experience, I did feel more quote unquote gotten. But as I grew and changed, and those around me grew and changed, and a lot of those relationships became more distant for a variety of reasons, it actually made it harder for me for a while to be willing to let them go. And in a lot of cases, I probably clung way too hard and I was like needy about it. I do realize a lot of it was age and growing apart. Other cases was unwillingness to have conversations or to grow and change. And a lot of it was a lot of people got married and had kids, and I worked and stayed single for the most part. It did become much easier to make peace with when looking at it like that, rather than as something dramatic and negative. When I started looking at it like we were just growing up rather than I was losing a piece of my youth, I think that was probably helpful. It wasn't until I figured out who I was, until I realized I spent too much of my life worried about how gotten I was by the people in my direct vicinity, trying to over explain and re explain myself all the time. I was still feeling misunderstood, even by the people that I thought understood me the most, who were basing a lot of their own judgments of me based on previous versions of me. I've said this in previous episodes, but one of the most helpful things in my life has been coming to terms with the fact that many people are just committed to misunderstanding, especially if they have a particular narrative that they're trying to run with. A lot of words, 'cause I'm sure it'll never last. If that's the case, most of them won't hear you if you try to explain anyway, because they're just not willing to. They have to be open and willing to have the conversation and open and willing to understand to be able to move past that in a healthy, positive way. So there's really no way to make everyone happy. And when you know who you are and your own values, at least you know how to make yourself happy. Not in a selfish way, but to give yourself some direction on what a life that would make you happy looks like to you. For me, that's helped with a lot of my anxiety. There will always be haters that are going to hate. Because I tend to stay as objective as I can when dealing with complex situations, I usually don't get a ton of support from anywhere. Also, trusting the wrong people, also common theme. And mostly just get treated like a Swiss swing vote, neutral and only important when convenient. I've also said in previous episodes that in most aspects of my life, I've been an only in some capacity, which makes it even harder to find connections to any aspect, let alone in a way that has felt whole, other than maybe a whole ass data anomaly. That's what's shaped the uniqueness of my perspective, though, and is a large part of why I try to consider variations so I can come up with the most fair determinations or solutions Usually, in my experience, no one gets decisions I make unless I make ones that benefit them in some way. Unfortunately, the expectation has usually been for it to be at my expense. And it would be different if I didn't hold myself to a standard of accountability, but I do. I'll own up to my mistakes, at least the real ones, and not the fabricated ones to push ahead a narrative. I found the disconnect when I figured out who I was and how misaligned the expectations were with myself compared to other people, especially the older I got and the more single I stayed. The same people don't have to live my life. Of those I was seeking guidance, support, and advice from. Their perspectives were shaped by their life experiences, as mine did for me. So even if their intentions were good, not all of it made sense within the context of my life. A lot of their expectations were often based off of how they would react or what they would do in a specific situation from their perspective, or from their perspective of my situation, if that makes sense. Because not a lot of them had to experience a lot of the things that I did. They already had kind of a warped view on who I was and what my life was like. As mentioned, my situations were often much different. So for me, it was like a lot of solo side quests, while most of them had partners that they could share the load and like have fun with along the way. Or in other cases, were just older people who grew up in a different generation or environment and didn't necessarily understand that not all the same problems or challenges can be handled the same way that they would have back when they were my age, kind of thing. Not all of it is feasible because there are modern components that need to be considered. Like, you should hear my mom and I debate the subject of online dating in the 2020s. So I found it helpful when I learned to discern which advice was actually helpful to my specific situations, based on what I knew of the life experiences and the perspectives of those giving me that advice in comparison to whatever my experience is/was and what they know of it, or where they entered my story and which version of me they know the best. Overall, I've found practicing this has helped me better comprehend situations that I myself haven't necessarily experienced. Though I'm not saying that my own comprehension never comes in the form of hindsight, which can still be something that I struggle with. I'll also add the reminder that I view life as a spectrum of beliefs, thoughts, and feelings, etc. Also, as mentioned, there are many subjects where I prefer to remain objective or neutral when offering insight, even if my own personal opinions may lean closer to one way or another. I'm always open for a debate and hearing various perspectives. For me, it's like an energetic respect thing. And I think it's important to make informed decisions, which is where knowing both sides is super beneficial. It's all about being able to find that balance. For what it's worth, most of my friends' significant others also often used to choose me as the preferred mediator for disputes because they knew I'd be fair to both sides. I always thought it was better for them to try to find a solution because they were just going to break up and get back together anyways about the same thing 1,000 times. And I could usually help facilitate the conversation in a way that would be constructive so that they could grow and move past it. Because really, that should be the goal. If the intent is to create a healthier situation out of it, I find it helps prevent things like full-on shouting matches or further escalations, and usually leads to better solutions that closer resemble compromise. Even though there were definitely times where it caused issues between me and my friends and my loyalty was called into question, Being fair and making sure everyone has a chance to be heard within a situation is something that's always been really important to me. I generally feel like situations get resolved a lot smoother when everybody involved feels like someone gets their side of the story in some way. The majority of people are less contentious if they're not feeling backed into a corner. But I also hope that I'm a little bit of living proof that even when you are backed into a wall and it feels like the world is against you, you can still maintain some positivity and hope and proceed with love. Honestly, my own personal challenges are what brought me back to God and my faith, or at least getting me back on the path to rebuilding my faith and rebuilding that connection with God. Not only has He given me so many more reasons to believe, even through it all. So nice to see your face again, but tell me, will this ever end? From my observations and like through my own life, a lot of resentments that I see come from feeling like there are more concessions being made than compromises. And that's when it starts feeling like a losing game. So, perspective shapes how we view situations. And although comprehension is important, it can only go as far as your reality allows. Could be like me, I just have so many handlers trying to create mine. I wish they'd come up with more positive narratives, though. There are few people that understand what that's like, and the ones that do tend to get labeled as other things. So, I mean, it's a hard situation for other people to quote unquote get. So, glimmers more resembled moments of reprieve more than a win of any sort to me. Open dialogue here hasn't been as practiced as it used to be. The importance of seeing other perspectives and being willing to have those conversations, even if they're hard, and being able to look beyond talking points because there's more to everybody than just talking points. But none of us will truly get each other if all we focus on is the talking points. There was a long time in my life where I did wallow in resentment a lot. It wasn't healthy, and they were some really dark times in my life. And also, not to say that I don't have moments of resentment now, but that's definitely not a feeling I like to hold on to. Again, for me, I've found the best way for me to move past that feeling is to focus on myself and how I can improve. A negative thing can ruin your day just as much as a positive thing can make it brighter. It's all about how you look at it. And honestly, like with my life, it's just a series of stressful situations. And I've learned that there's a lot that doesn't deserve a lot of tears or energy if you choose to learn and grow from it. Not every challenge feels like a mountain, might seem more like another river or lake like you're used to. For me, I see it as I have two options: be resentful to have to make the climb, or think about it as a workout. If thought of as a workout, it shifts the focus more towards beating your personal best rather than looking at it as a competition with others. I've found glimmers are much easier to see or recognize when I focus on improving and competing with myself. And because I have a tendency to feel guilty anytime I have a personal win or accomplishment for anything, just based on how the people around me act or treat me, being my own benchmark has actually allowed me to appreciate the glimmer in the moment a lot better. Be grateful for it. Hope it attracts more positivity. Just feel good about it in that moment. That doesn't mean feeling like absolute ass is always unavoidable, though, and that's not to minimize anything either. Sometimes things just suck. I've found that trying to keep the faith, as hard as it sounds and as cliche as it sounds, and continuing to operate with love and good intentions can help keep some light on your path, even when things look dark. This is also the part where I mention that it's also important to have a healthy outlet that allows you to redirect some of those tougher emotions into something positive, like art or sports, releasing the physical and mental energy in a healthy and positive way. For me, I've become accustomed to feeling misunderstood. I've also determined that I'll always feel like that unless I'm being my authentic self. How would anyone be able to understand me if I don't understand me? And how would those connections be truly meaningful if I'm not showing up honestly? How can I expect them to? I'd also like to think that showing up truthfully encourages more reciprocity when it comes to honesty, while allowing some grace for learning. It's also a good way to give space to others to open up at their own pace. One day, I hope that I can finally be gotten, and in a way that's closer to the truth, rather than just a series of contrived gotcha moments intended to break my spirit. Maybe I'll never be truly gotten, but the only way to know is to stay true to me, so at least I know myself. So then I can better determine whether or not someone really does understand me and who I am. I've been saving these last words for one last miracle, but now I'm not sure. Maybe one day there's a path that I take that actually leads to safety. All I can do is hope things will get better and have faith that God will get me through the hardships. But until then, I'm going to stay prayed up, continue to operate in love, and continue to show compassion and understanding and grace. Never been gotten before. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with how that turned out. It is a lot of fun to play. I do actually really like playing sort of the intro and the instrumental parts, the first instrumental. But otherwise, I really liked it. It's just a nice song to kind of vibe along to. I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. Like I said, there was a lot of variation to it, so it felt good. Like it didn't feel too repetitive. It is a pretty long song though, and there is that large guitar solo in it. So like this is probably one of those songs that's better to play with a friend and like just jam out to. Yeah, glad I gave it a try, and thanks for coming along for the ride. And until next time, keep the peace and keep rocking on.